Hello there. Today I'm delighted to be looking at a wine that I've been sent by a producer. So this is Herzog Estate's Spirit of Marlborough 2016. I should perhaps talk about the naming of this wine. We refer to it as Hans Herzog Family Estates simply because there are some trademarking issues. So in New Zealand and Australia, Hans Herzog used their own name to sell the wines. Outside Australia and New Zealand, they label the wines as Hans Family Estates. So it's the same wine, just a different label according to which market you're in. Hans and Teresa came to New Zealand, Hans and Teresa Herzog, in 1994, and they bought an apple orchard, which they grubbed up as an apple orchard and planted 2 years later, had planted as a vineyard. A couple of years later, they had a winery, and soon after that, they had a restaurant here as well. When they contacted me and said, would I be interested in trying one of their wines, I was quite intrigued as to what they might send, because looking at them, they've got 11.5 hectares of vines. They have 28 different grape varieties planted on those, and some of them, quite unusual. There's a selection of Italian varieties, things like Montepulciano, Barbera, Nebbiolo, Lagrein, slightly different there. Austrian varieties like Zweigelt, Blaufränkisch, St. Laurent, Saperavi, for instance, is a variety you don't see a lot of anywhere, to be honest. And also amongst the whites, sort of Gewürztraminer, Arnais, Verdelho, Marsanne, Roussin, Viognier, also Austrian variety, Grünefeldliner. So a real, and I'm sure I've forgotten a few of them there, a real diversity of styles and of varieties being used there. They do, being in Marlborough, make a Sauvignon Blanc, but they don't just make an ordinary Sauvignon Blanc, they make a higher quality wine. So they're not in the business of sort of high volume, cheap wines. So anyway, they sent me a bottle of the Spirit of Marlborough, and the reasoning for this is that this is the wine that made Hans change, they say, 500 years of his winemaking lineage, because he and Teresa had a winery in Zurich in Switzerland, where they'd also had a very successful restaurant, and Hans had always wanted to grow Bordeaux grape varieties, which Switzerland wasn't suitable to ripen. So when he came to the Wairau Valley in Marlborough, in the top of New Zealand's South Island, he found this 11.5 hectare plot with beautiful, rich, well-drained gravel, and it reminded him of the soils of Bordeaux, and this is what he wanted to make. So Spirit of Marlborough is that wine. So this is a wine that is roughly equal proportions: a third Cabernet Sauvignon, a third Cabernet Franc, and a third Merlot. So grown in Marlborough, and Marlborough, I think you have to think, is a fairly marginal climate for certainly for Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc in terms of getting those ripe. The approach that they use is entirely organic. They're certified by the organisation BioGrow, and they do certain things according to the biodynamic calendar, sort of in terms of being at one with the rhythm of the planets, for instance. In terms of the winery, again, minimal intervention is the approach there. So everything is hand-picked. There's no addition of yeasts. Everything ferments with wild yeast. There's no addition of enzymes to clarify or anything like that. There's no addition of bacteria such as malolactic to do that. There's no addition of tannins or acids or sugars. So this is entirely the result of the natural fermentation of grapes by the naturally occurring yeasts and those bacteria that have come in to the winery from the vineyard or were already present there. The other thing to say about this is actually, as a wine, it spends quite a lot of time in oak. This ages for 30 months in barriques, so 225 litre oak barrels, French oak, and they don't actually give an amount, but they say a large proportion of which is new, so probably half, a third maybe. So that there should be a fair oak influence there, but also the influence of air oxidation during that period in the cask, gentle oxidation just to soften the tannins and everything else. Also, this wine spends 30 months in bottle once it's been bottled. As part of the minimum intervention, there's very little processing. There's no cold stabilisation, there's no filtration, there's no fining, making it suitable for vegans if you're worried about that. So very little processing, and I guess because you're not filtering and that sort of thing, that's why it ages for so long in barrel, just to make sure the wine is completely stable before going to bottling. Other things I should have mentioned, there's I believe there's a cold soak, the skins soaking prior to fermentation, and the natural fermentation takes a long time. It's a slow fermentation that's going on there, and that'll either happen in open fermenters or in temperature controlled stainless steel tanks. So there's possibly a combination of both of those being used in this wine. So let's have a look and see what we've got here, shall we? First of all, looking at the colour, I think this is slightly paler than I would see from a Bordeaux of a similar sort of age. I mean, the colour is starting to fade a little at the rim. It's a ruby red. It's still quite darkly pigmented, but I can see through it fairly easily. The wine has 14% alcohol, yeah, but yes, is throwing tears quite readily on the glass there. So let's have a look at the aromas and see what we think there. The aromas are really quite restrained. The fruit is on the red fruit side of things. It's sort of my initial impression is sort of dried cranberry. Maybe there's a little bit of red currant. Maybe there's a little bit of dark plum in there. The oak is very well integrated. I'm not seeing that standing out at all. You can perhaps think that there might be slightly chocolatey, cedary notes behind it, but they're not sticking out from the fruit at all. They're completely integrated. So let's taste it. The wine has a nice balance. It's got reasonable acidity, but I don't think the acidity is quite as sharp as you generally get from a Bordeaux of this sort. There is some what seems slightly like leafiness, but actually it's not really green leafiness. I think it's grip from tannins, and those are possibly tannins that have come from the oak, because there's a certain toastiness and a chocolatey note to it. This wine will have undergone its malolactic fermentation or malolactic conversion in the barrel, so that will help produce those slightly chocolatey, sometimes slightly coffee-ish notes. This is more chocolatey than coffee. The red fruit has a nice depth there, but it's not the juicy sort of mulberry red fruit that I might expect, and it's not got a deep dark black fruit element. This is more sort of very ripe plum through to an almost pruny note in terms of flavour. Although I'm a bit reticent about using the expression prune, because that would sort of suggest a little bit of over maturity, which this really isn't showing. Maybe it's a slightly cooked plum note, but it's not a note of pruniness really. The structure is fine, and there is a bitterness to those tannins that are making it quite mouth-watering. Again, those tannins may actually come from oak. There's quite a lot of sort of drying astringency in there. But it's backed by sort of a chocolatey character that means it's really well integrated there. The flavours are lasting quite nicely. The structure is helping it last, and there's a sort of that ripe red plum to almost licoricey concentration there towards the end. and maybe that sort of bitterness I'm talking about is showing slightly as bitter licorice as anise. And the wine is lasting very nicely. I think this is a structured wine. I don't think it quite has the acidity that you'd expect from a Bordeaux, but there's certainly no lack of ripeness going on there. And I think this is a wine that you could quite happily put down for another 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 years, and it would continue to evolve. I think that would be a nice partner for something with a lot of fat, meat juices with it. I mean, something like a beautiful veined piece of lamb would work really nicely with that. This would you know, really come to life with something to play against it, because it's got those lovely, finely crafted, you know, slightly bitter, sort of slightly gripping tannins. So a really interesting wine, much more classic than I'd expected, probably very much towards the style of a Bordeaux, of a maybe from somewhere on the Haut-Médoc, maybe a sort of a good Cru Bourgeois sort of quality equivalent, good Cru Bourgeois, fifth growth or something like that, sort of equivalent of quality. Certainly a wine that will bear a little bit of age, and will continue to develop for a few years yet. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the video interesting. Thank you very much to Hans Herzog and his family for sending the wine to try. Do please follow us on YouTube, do like, do share the video, but most importantly, join us again. Bye now.